It is commonly accepted that the Pilgrims traveled to America for religious freedoms and struggled through the first harsh winters before finally making the colony successful through the grace of God. But this is only half true. Few people reflect on the economics of this early colony and how the Pilgrims affected the future economy of the United States. The Pilgrims did not just find a place to worship as they wished. They found somewhere they could test out new concepts of societal structures in the face of hardship and death. These ideas didn't just help the Plymouth colony survive, they laid a foundation on which the future United States would be built. Join us as we list 5 economic influences the Pilgrims had on modern America. Number 1. Accumulation of debt. Nowadays, the American economy is intertwined with debt, with some specialists insisting it is good for the economy and others saying it impedes economic growth. However you feel about the subject, you can thank the Pilgrims for helping to introduce this concept to America. The Pilgrims were part of a religious group known as the Separatists. They wanted to separate themselves from the newly formed Church of England. To avoid religious persecution, many of the Separatists moved to the Netherlands in pursuit of religious freedom. Life in the Netherlands was not as easy as they had hoped, and with the threat of another war between the Netherlands and Spain looming, the Separatists decided they would head for America in the hopes of establishing a colony. The only problem was money, or the lack thereof. They needed investors, and their only tradable commodity was their labor and any resources they may have access to on their arrival on the continent. The investors were called merchant adventurers. They were English financial investors who agreed to finance the voyage and establishment of the colony in exchange for natural resources the settlers would send back and the ownership of the land and property that the colonists established once there. Clearly, this was pretty one-sided in favor of the merchant adventurers, but as they were providing the financial backing, the Separatists had little choice but to agree. Eventually, it was contracted that the assets accumulated by the colonists, including land and property, would be divided amongst the financiers and the Pilgrims after 7 years. The Pilgrims were not exactly happy about these terms. Still, as many financial backers had been put off investing in new American settlements by the fiscally disastrous Jamestown colony, they had to agree or forfeit their chance of traveling to America. As problems mounted for the Pilgrims and ships were lost or unsuitable for travel, they were forced to borrow more money, increasing the debt. By 1626, the debt was renegotiated, and 8 colonists, plus 4 London associates, agreed to repay a portion of the debt that a further 45 Plymouth householders shared. The Plymouth colony was not the success that investors had hoped for, but the colonists eventually repaid £1,800 on the original debt, which is thought to have been around £7,000. As the American colonies moved toward becoming the United States, America continued to use the accumulation of debt to help pay for programs and services that it could not finance itself. During the American Revolutionary War, the U.S. accumulated over $75 million in national debt. Nowadays, the U.S. national debt is divided between debt held by individuals and that held by the government. The current national debt of the U.S. is $33 trillion, with most of it held by Japan and China, and it is unlikely that the U.S. will ever get out of debt. Whether the national debt is good or bad for the U.S. economy is still a subject of debate. But what is clear is that some of the first Europeans to come to America benefited from borrowing money, a trend that is continued by the U.S. government since its inception. Number 2. Economic migrants. The Pilgrims could be described as the first economic migrants to America, coming in search of freedom and greater personal wealth. While they had traveled from England to escape religious persecution, their move from the Netherlands was more financially motivated. In fact, their life in Holland was so economically harsh that many Separatists chose to remain in England under the threat of imprisonment rather than bring their families to the Netherlands. When the wool market crashed, the only real income that the Separatists had collapsed with it. While the decision to move to America wasn't purely financially motivated, economic stability was a huge lure for the prospective colonists. So much so that aboard the Mayflower were other economic migrants who did not share the same religious beliefs as the Pilgrims, but did share their desire for increased wealth and financial stability. These immigrants had a massive impact on the future U.S. economy and paved the way for others seeking financial gain. economic immigrants are still hugely important to the U.S. economy. Many industries, including healthcare and hospitality, rely on immigrant workers. They help expand the labor force and offset the declining growth rate of the U.S. population. Their contribution to the workforce helps power the U.S. economy. Yes, the first European Americans were economic migrants themselves, without whom the United States would not be what it is today. Number 3. Free market economy. One thing that set the Pilgrims apart from other colonists at the time was their attitude toward communal living. Most colonies across America adopted an economic strategy akin to communism, in which all chores were shared and property was jointly owned. However, the Plymouth colony began to see issues with this system. On the brink of starvation and amidst ongoing death and suffering, the more able-bodied colonists started to complain that their efforts were not gaining them any more than the laziest among them. In response to the complaints, the colony's leaders decided that people might work harder if they had something to gain. They allowed each family to farm for themselves, hoping this would encourage self-sufficiency and enterprise. The strategy paid off, and it was reported that it made all hands very industrious. Much more corn was planted than otherwise would have been, and women went willingly into the field, and they took their little ones with them to set corn. The newfound economic freedom had a positive effect on the colony, and working to further their own health and wealth fueled the colonists. Allowing them to take responsibility for their own prosperity without interference from a governing body gave the colonists a reason to work hard. They began to prosper and grow more food, which meant they had enough resources to sustain themselves and begin to pay back the financiers as they were able to trade corn for furs with the local tribes. The agricultural abundance that came after the Pilgrims switched to a free economy paved the way for America's passion for free trade, an idea that is still hotly debated today. The success of free trade in the Plymouth colony could also be said to have contributed to America's aversion to communism and socialism as a threat to the American way of life. Number 4. Private property ownership. Part of the Pilgrims' move away from other colonial systems was the establishment of private property ownership. Europe had been a feudal system for generations, which had led to most American colonies adopting a similar practice, with property owned communally or by financiers. However, after 3 years of living this way, the Plymouth colonists decided to move away from communal ownership and give the colonists incentives, meaning they would work harder and stop complaining about injustice. It was thought that common ownership would lead to a greater communal spirit amongst the colonists. As the financiers had insisted that any property would become part of the colony's assets, it had been agreed that all the buildings the colonists erected would be communally owned. The merchant adventurers who had provided the money for the venture worried that if the colonists were permitted to own houses and land privately, they would neglect their duties to the company to advance their own plots. However, the shared duties soon led to discontent among the settlers, who had been unhappy with the terms in the first place. However, it was not the investors with whom the Pilgrims took issue. It was each other. If all the colonists were to end up with an equal share of the assets after 7 years, those seen to not be pulling their weight would end up with the same as those who worked hard. Seeing the colony failing, Governor William Bradford decided to allow the colonists to own private property, and the communal land was divided amongst the families that made up the settlement. Now, everyone was responsible not only for themselves, but also for the actions of their family members. As a result, each household worked harder and encouraged their family members to do the same. Private property rights are the backbone of the U.S.'s capitalist economy today. Most economists generally agree that owning private property will give the owner a resource and the incentive to maximize the value of that resource. This theory echoes the findings of the Plymouth colony when it decided to incentivize the colonists by giving them an asset to which they could add value, allowing them to make gains through their labor. Number 5. The economics of the American dream. Those first Pilgrim colonists essentially invented the core concept of the American dream, which is something that has driven the U.S. economy since before the conception of the United States. The foundation laid by the Pilgrims, who needed to inspire the colonists into action in order to avoid starvation, death, or revolt, could be said to be what has kept America running ever since. Essentially, this is the idea that by working hard, you're able to prosper. When the founders of the United States set out the framework for the U.S. economy, their sentiments echoed those of the Pilgrim settlers in that they believed in a free market and a system that allowed businesses to be regulated through private measures rather than by government. Their intention was to encourage entrepreneurship in an open society wherein anyone who works hard can prosper. The reality of this dream remains a highly subjective subject. However, whether or not the American dream is achievable is beside the point. The idea that hard work will allow a person and their family to prosper is an ideal that has driven the American economy ever since Europeans first began colonizing the country. It has inspired countless immigrants to travel to the country and spawn millions of new business ventures. The idea that prosperity is within the grasp of anyone greatly contrasted with the historically feudalist class systems of Europe, in which hard work only benefited those who did not have to labor. This idea still attracts people from across the globe to journey to America, hoping to make, or at least change, their fortunes. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about the history of America, check out our book, The Pilgrims, a captivating guide to the passengers on board the Mayflower who founded the Plymouth colony and their relationship with the Native Americans along with their legacy in New England. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you found the video captivating, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.